A story of lost love, hidden identity, and a promise that refused to die. Sophie Dawson's hands trembled as she signed the employment contract, her signature barely legible through the blur of exhaustion. 3 months ago, she'd had everything: a trust fund, a penthouse view, parents who smiled at charity galas. Now she had a uniform 2 sizes too large and a basement room that smelled of lavender detergent and regret. Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome back to another story that'll grip your heart and refuse to let go. I'm so glad you're here with me today. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Are you curled up in bed? On your lunch break? Wherever you are, I hope you're doing well. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss what happens next in this story. Trust me on this one. The mansion loomed before her like a monument to everything she'd lost. Pale stone walls stretched 3 stories high, windows gleaming like accusatory eyes in the late afternoon sun. Sophie adjusted the strap of her duffel bag, the only possession she'd managed to keep, and felt the familiar weight of the silver locket shift against her collarbone beneath her blouse. She tucked it deeper, hidden, always hidden. You the new girl? Mrs. Castellano, the head housekeeper, stood in the doorway with the posture of a woman who'd spent decades perfecting disapproval. Her gray hair was wound so tight it pulled at her temples, and her lips pursed as she examined Sophie from scuffed shoes to hastily tied hair. Yes, ma'am. Sophie Dawson. The master returns from Singapore tonight. Mrs. Castellano's eyes narrowed. You'll keep to the lower floors. You don't speak unless spoken to. You don't touch anything valuable. And you absolutely do not make eye contact with Mr. Callahan. Understood? Sophie nodded, though something cold slithered down her spine at the name. Callahan. It couldn't be. The universe wasn't that cruel. Good. Your duties begin at 5 a.m. The master prefers his staff invisible. Mrs. Castellano turned sharply, her keys jangling. Follow me. The interior was worse than the exterior, all marble and mahogany, crystal chandeliers catching the dying light and scattering it like diamonds. Sophie had grown up in wealth, had walked across floors just like these without a second thought. Now each step felt like trespassing on sacred ground, her cheap shoes squeaking against perfection. They passed a portrait in the main hall, and Sophie's breath caught. A family. Father, mother, young boy with serious dark eyes and a mouth that hadn't yet learned to smile for cameras. The boy clutched a toy airplane, his small fingers white-knuckled around it like it was the only real thing in the frame. That's Mr. Callahan as a child, Mrs. Castellano said without looking back. Before the accident that took his parents. He was 8. Sophie couldn't move, couldn't breathe, because she knew that face, older now in her memory, laughing instead of solemn, grass-stained instead of portrait-perfect. I'll marry you when we grow up, Sophie. I promise. We'll have adventures, and you'll never be sad again. Andrew. Little Andrew Callahan, with dirt on his cheeks and wildflowers in his fist, making promises in her mother's garden while their parents sipped champagne and planned futures like they were playing chess with human pieces. Are you coming or not? Mrs. Castellano's voice cut through the memory like glass. Sophie forced her legs to move, forced her face into neutrality, even as her heart jackhammered against her ribs. It couldn't be him. Andrew had been sent to boarding school in Switzerland after his parents died. The engagement had dissolved like sugar in rain. Her parents had called it inappropriate, once the Callahan fortune was tied up in trusts and legal battles. But the name, the house, that face in the portrait, her hand drifted to the locket beneath her uniform, feeling the engraving she'd traced 10,000 times in the dark. AC plus SD forever. Your room. Mrs. Castellano opened a door to a space barely larger than a closet. A single bed, a wooden chair, a lamp that flickered when she pulled the chain. Be grateful Mr. Callahan is generous enough to provide live-in accommodations. Many wouldn't. Generous. The word tasted like copper in Sophie's mouth. She wanted to laugh, to scream, to demand answers about where that generous boy had gone. The one who'd cried when she'd skinned her knee, who'd shared his last cookie even when he was hungry. But she just nodded. Thank you, ma'am. The door closed, and Sophie was alone with the ghosts of 18 years and a promise engraved in silver. She sat on the bed. It creaked like arthritic bones, and pulled the locket free. The clasp was worn smooth from years of opening and closing, revealing the two faces inside. A boy with dark eyes and a girl with hope in her smile, both of them young enough to believe in forever. A door slammed somewhere above, followed by footsteps. Heavy, purposeful, male. Sophie's pulse spiked. She snapped the locket shut and shoved it back beneath her uniform as the footsteps grew louder, closer, accompanied now by voices. Don't care about the Singapore delays. Fire whoever caused them. The voice was deep, cold, sharp as January ice. I don't pay people to make excuses. Yes, Mr. Callahan. Right away, Mr. Callahan. The footsteps passed her door, and Sophie pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. That voice. She'd know it anywhere, even twisted into something cruel and unfamiliar. Even wrapped in authority and anger instead of laughter. Andrew was home, and he had no idea she was here. The girl he'd promised forever to, now scrubbing his floors and hiding in the basement like a ghost of everything they'd lost. Sophie's eyes burned, but she didn't let herself cry. She'd learned that lesson 3 months ago when the bankruptcy lawyers had stripped her life bare and her parents had disappeared to start over in Europe without her. Tears changed nothing. Tears were a luxury she couldn't afford. But as she lay in the dark, listening to Andrew's voice drift through the ventilation system, still giving orders, still sounding like a stranger, Sophie touched the locket one more time. What would he do if he knew? The question kept her awake until dawn, tangled up with fear and something more dangerous. Hope. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced the darkness at 4:30 a.m., and Sophie's body moved on autopilot. Months of survival had taught her that much. She dressed in a gray uniform, twisted her dark hair into a bun so tight it pulled at her scalp, and avoided the cracked mirror above the sink. She didn't need to see what grief and poverty had carved into her face. The kitchen was a cavern of stainless steel and stone, already humming with activity. Maria, the cook, worked at the stove with the efficiency of someone who'd made the same breakfast for 20 years. She was round and soft, where Mrs. Castellano was sharp and brittle, her brown eyes kind beneath tired lids. You're Sophie, yes? Maria slid a mug of coffee across the counter. Drink. You'll need it. Mr. Callahan takes his breakfast at 7 sharp. He notices everything. Dust on a bookshelf, a crooked picture frame, a second's hesitation when he speaks. She crossed herself quickly. That man misses nothing. Sophie's hands wrapped around the mug's warmth. What's he like? Maria's expression shuddered. Brilliant. Ruthless. He built his empire from the ashes of his parents' company, tripled its value in 10 years. But cold, Mija. So cold. I worked here 5 years and never seen him smile. Not once. She turned back to her eggs. Whatever warmth that boy had died with his parents. No. Sophie wanted to protest. You didn't know him before. You didn't see him rescue a baby bird from a storm drain, or hear him read poetry to his mother when she was sick, or watch him share his coat with a homeless man in winter. But that was 18 years ago. People changed. The boy who'd promised her forever had become a man who made employees tremble. Here, Maria handed her a list. Start with the library. He's already been in there since 5. He never sleeps more than 4 hours. Don't disturb him, just dust and straighten. Move like a shadow. Sophie climbed the servant's stairs, her heart a trapped bird beating against her ribs. The library doors were open just enough for her to slip through sideways, and the room beyond stole her breath. Floor-to-ceiling shelves crammed with leather-bound volumes. A ladder on brass rails. Windows overlooking gardens that had once been her playground. And in the center of it all, backlit by the rising sun, stood Andrew Callahan. He was nothing like the boy in her memory. Tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that filled out his charcoal suit like armor. His dark hair was shorter now, professionally styled, threaded with silver at the temples, though he couldn't be more than 28. The softness of childhood had been chiseled away, leaving sharp cheekbones and a jaw that could cut glass. But his eyes, those dark eyes she'd recognize in any crowd, any lifetime, were the same, even if the warmth had been stripped from them. He stood at his desk, phone pressed to his ear, and his voice carried across the library like a judge delivering sentence. I don't care if it's a holiday in Tokyo. Get you on the line or find yourself another job. He ended the call without waiting for a response and immediately dialed again. Davis? The Mumbai contract. I want it signed by noon or we walk. No, I don't negotiate. They need us more than we need them. Sophie kept to the edges of the room. Dusting shelves, she could barely see through the thunder of her pulse. She was 10 feet away from him. 10 feet from the boy who'd kissed her cheek under the oak tree and sworn they'd never be apart. He had no idea she was even in the room. You missed a spot. His voice cracked like a whip, and Sophie's hand froze mid-reach. Third shelf, right side. There's dust along the spine of the Dickens collection. She turned slowly, expecting to find him looking at her, but he was still focused on his laptop screen, typing with violent precision. He'd noticed her work without even glancing her way. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, sir. The words tasted like ash. She'd never called anyone sir in her life. She'd been the one people deferred to, the girl with the trust fund and the pedigree and the future handed to her on platinum. Don't apologize. Just do it right the first time. He still hadn't looked up. What's your name? Sophie's throat closed. This was it, the moment he'd recognize her voice, her face, something. The moment 18 years of silence would shatter. Sophie, sir. She barely whispered it. Sophie Dawson. Nothing. Not even a pause in his typing. The name that had once made him smile now registered as nothing more than staff identification. You knew. A statement, not a question. Mrs. Castellano mentioned she'd hired someone desperate enough to accept below-market wages. His fingers never stopped moving. Don't make me regret her charity. The cruelty of it nearly buckled her knees. Not because of the words themselves, but because they were delivered with such casual indifference, like she was furniture that had disappointed him. This wasn't Andrew. Couldn't be. No, sir. Sophie turned back to the shelf, her vision blurring. She found the dust he'd mentioned, barely visible, just a whisper of gray, and wiped it away with shaking hands. Better. He closed his laptop with a sharp snap. I have a conference call in my study. Don't follow me there. In fact, stay out of the East Wing entirely when I'm home. I don't like being watched. He walked past her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, cedar and something darker, expensive, and for half a heartbeat his arm brushed hers. Andrew stopped. Sophie held her breath as he stood there, frozen mid-step, his body suddenly rigid. She didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. Had he felt it? That electric shock of recognition that had just about stopped her heart? But then he continued walking, his footsteps steady and sure, and the library door closed behind him with a decisive click. Sophie sagged against the bookshelf, her legs finally giving out. She slid to the floor among the dust and leather and ghosts, pressing her hand over the locket beneath her uniform. He didn't know her, didn't recognize her voice or her face or even the way she moved. 18 years had erased her completely from his memory, while she'd carried him in her heart every single day. You all right, Chica? Maria stood in the doorway with a broom, her expression sympathetic. First encounter with Mr. Callahan is always hard. You get used to the ice eventually, or at least you learn to work around it. Does he? Sophie's voice cracked. She tried again. Does he ever talk about his past? His childhood? Maria shook her head slowly. Never. It's like he was born the day his parents died. Everything before that is locked away somewhere, even his therapist can't reach. She paused. Why? You know something about him? No. Sophie pushed herself upright, smoothing her uniform with trembling hands. Just curious. But as she went through the motions of cleaning, dusting, sweeping, organizing, her mind spun with possibilities and pain. What had happened to Andrew in those years after his parents' death? What had transformed a gentle boy into this cold, unreachable man? And more importantly, if she revealed herself, would he even care? Or had she become as irrelevant to his life as dust on a bookshelf? The questions followed her through the rest of the day as she scrubbed floors Andrew would never notice, polished silver he'd never touch, and made invisible the very existence he'd forgotten. But that night, alone in her basement room, Sophie, the boy in the photograph, smiled up at her with joy she could barely remember feeling. And the girl beside him looked at him like he'd hung the moon just for her. "I'll find you again," she whispered to the boy in the picture, to the ghost of who Andrew used to be. "I'll find the real you, even if you've forgotten how to find yourself." She didn't know if it was a promise or a prayer. Maybe it was both. The incident happened on Sophie's 6th day, in the blue hour between afternoon and evening when the mansion held its breath. She'd been assigned to Andrew's study, a space Mrs. Castellano usually reserved for herself, but the head housekeeper had taken ill with flu. Sophie had protested, remembering Andrew's warning about the East Wing, but Maria had pushed a vacuum into her hands with an apologetic shrug. "He's in London until tomorrow. You'll be fine, Mija. Just be quick." The study was magnificent and terrible, all dark wood and leather, awards lining the walls like trophies from a war Sophie didn't understand. His desk dominated the space, covered in architectural plans and contracts with numbers that made her dizzy. She'd once had money like that. Now she scrubbed toilets for minimum wage. Sophie worked mechanically, trying not to look at the photographs scattered across his desk. Andrew shaking hands with presidents. Andrew at ribbon cuttings. Andrew always alone, always unsmiling, always wrapped in expensive armor. Then she saw it. A folder half hidden beneath the contracts, with her family name stamped across the tab. Dawson bankruptcy proceedings. Her hands moved before her brain could stop them. She opened the folder, and the world tilted sideways. Pages of financial records. Her parents' signatures. Dates and dollar amounts that tracked the systematic destruction of everything her family had built. And there, highlighted in yellow, clause after clause detailing asset seizures, property transfers, creditor agreements. Every page bore the same stamp at the bottom, approved by Callahan Industries. Sophie's knees hit the carpet. The vacuum fell with a crash that echoed like a gunshot. Andrew hadn't just watched her family fall. He'd orchestrated it. His company had been the primary creditor, the one who'd called in debts and forced liquidation, the one who'd purchased their estate at auction for a fraction of its value. This mansion, this prison where she cleaned and hid and ached, had been bought with the ashes of everything she'd loved. "I thought I told you to stay out of my study." Sophie's head snapped up. Andrew stood in the doorway, still in his travel suit, a carry-on at his feet. His eyes, those dark, cold eyes, fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin burn. "Sir, I'm sorry. I didn't know you'd returned." She scrambled to her feet, trying to close the folder, but his gaze had already tracked to it, to the name Dawson printed in bold letters. Something flickered across his face. Too fast to read, gone before she could name it. He crossed the room in 4 long strides and snatched the folder from her trembling hands. "You're reading confidential documents." His voice was silk over steel. "That's grounds for immediate dismissal and legal action." I didn't mean." Sophie's throat closed around the lies. What could she say? That she'd recognized her own destruction and couldn't look away? "You didn't mean to invade my privacy?" Andrew's jaw tightened. "Or you didn't mean to get caught?" "Both." "Neither." Sophie forced herself to meet his eyes, even though every instinct screamed to look away. "I saw my family's name, and I knew them. The Dawsons. Before they lost everything. It was the truth. Just not all of it." Andrew's expression shuddered completely. The Dawsons were careless with their fortune. They made poor investments and poorer choices. What happened to them was inevitable. He said it like he was discussing the weather, not the annihilation of her entire world. "Do you have a point, Miss Dawson? Or are you simply stalling?" The use of her last name, so casual, so empty of recognition, hit harder than any cruelty he'd spoken before. She was a stranger to him, completely, utterly erased. Unless... Sophie's hand drifted to her collar, fingers finding the chain of the locket beneath her uniform. One pull, one reveal, and he'd know everything. But the words in the folder burned in her mind. Approved by Callahan Industries. This man had destroyed her family. Had he known it was her? Had he done it deliberately? Or had she been so inconsequential that he'd crushed her without even noticing? "No point, sir." Sophie stepped back, her hand falling away from the locket. "It won't happen again. See that it doesn't." Andrew turned away, dismissing her with a gesture. Leave the vacuum. I'll have someone else finish. Sophie moved toward the door on legs that felt like water, but his voice stopped her before she could escape. Miss Dawson. She froze, her back to him, terrified he'd somehow felt the weight of the locket, the truth she carried like a stone around her neck. Did you know them well? His tone had changed. Softer, somehow. Almost curious. The Dawson family. Sophie's nails cut crescents into her palms. Once. A lifetime ago. Were they good people? The question stunned her. She turned slowly, searching his face for mockery or trap, but found only a strange, distant expression, like he was looking at something far beyond her, beyond this room, beyond now. Yes, she whispered. They were. At least, they tried to be. Andrew nodded once, a tiny movement that might have been agreement or dismissal. That's more than most can claim. He opened the folder again, his finger tracing the Dawson name. Still, good intentions don't pay debts. Remember that. Is that why you destroyed them? The words escaped before Sophie could cage them. Because they owed you money? The temperature in the room plummeted. Andrew's head lifted, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that's, I destroyed nothing, he said quietly, dangerously. I enforced contracts they signed willingly. I followed laws they broke repeatedly. If they were destroyed, they did it to themselves. He paused. And to their daughter, if I recall correctly. There was a daughter. Sophie's heart stopped. Was there? Sophia Delacroix Dawson. Andrew said her full name like he was reading from a document, emotionless and precise. Disappeared 3 months ago when the bankruptcy finalized. Parents fled to France. No one knows where the daughter ended up. His eyes narrowed. Did you know her? This was it. The moment that would change everything. Sophie could feel the truth clawing at her throat, desperate to break free. I'm her. I'm right here. I've been here all along, and you never saw me because you chose not to remember. But the folder lay open on his desk. The proof of his calculated destruction of everything she'd been. No, Sophie lied, and each letter tasted like poison. I never knew her. Probably for the best. Andrew closed the folder with finality. I heard she was spoiled. Entitled. The type of person who'd never survive real hardship. He looked at Sophie then, really looked at her for the first time since she'd entered his home, and something in his gaze made her feel stripped bare. Not like you. Sir, you're still here. Andrew gestured vaguely at her uniform, the vacuum, the evidence of her fall. Working. Surviving. Most people with your background would have given up by now. Found an easier path. His voice dropped. Or a richer husband. Sophie's laugh escaped bitter and sharp. Maybe I'm too proud for that. Pride's expensive, but there was something almost like respect in his tone. It'll cost you everything eventually. It already has. The words hung between them, loaded with meaning Andrew couldn't possibly understand. Sophie watched him watch her, and for just a second, one breathless, impossible second, she thought she saw a recognition flicker in his eyes. Thought she saw the boy beneath the man, reaching for the girl beneath the maid. Then his phone rang, shattering the moment like crystal, and Andrew turned away to answer it. Get back to work, Miss Dawson, he said without looking at her, and close the door on your way out. Sophie fled. She made it halfway down the corridor before the tears came, hot and furious and useless. She pressed her back against the wall and slid down, her hand finally pulling the locket free of her uniform. The clasp opened. The faces smiled up at her, young, hopeful, untouched by betrayal. Did you know it was me? She wanted to scream at the photograph of little Andrew. When you signed the papers that took everything from my family, did you remember the girl you promised forever to? Or had I already stopped matching? Hey, Maria appeared around the corner, her arms full of fresh linens. Her expression softened when she saw Sophie's tears. Oh, Mija, he got to you, didn't he? That man has a gift for finding exactly where people hurt. I'm fine. Sophie wiped her face roughly, shoving the locket back beneath her uniform. Just tired. You're a terrible liar. Maria sat beside her, the linens forming a mountain in her lap. You want my advice? Don't let him in. Whatever walls you have, build them higher. Mr. Callahan doesn't mean to be cruel, At least I don't think he does. But he's forgotten how to be human. And people like that, they'll break you without even noticing. Sophie thought about the folder. About Andrew saying her name like she was already dead. About the way he'd looked at her at the end, like maybe, just maybe, some buried part of him remembered something important. What if he's not broken? Sophie asked quietly. What if he's just lost? Maria studied her for a long moment. Then God help you, girl, because finding lost men is the fastest way to lose yourself. She stood, hefting the linens, and left Sophie alone in the corridor with her tears and her locket and a choice that felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Jump or walk away. Reveal herself or stay hidden. Risk everything or protect what little she had left. That night, Sophie made her decision. She pulled out a pen and paper and began to write, not a letter, but a list. Every memory she had of Andrew before the coldness, before the loss, before he forgot how to be the boy who'd promised her forever. She would find that boy again, would prove to herself that he still existed beneath the ice and armor. And when she'd collected enough proof, enough moments where his mask slipped and humanity showed through, then and only then would she reveal the truth. The locket could wait. Sophie Dawson had survived bankruptcy, abandonment, and poverty. She could survive Andrew Callahan's indifference a little longer. She had to believe it was possible. Because if Andrew was truly gone, if the boy she'd loved had died with his parents and could never be resurrected, then Sophie had nothing left to live for except survival. And she'd learned over these past 3 months that survival alone wasn't enough. Hi there. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss what happens next in this story. Trust me on this one. The first crack in Andrew's armor appeared 3 days later in the garden at dawn. Sophie had taken to walking the grounds before her shift, partly because the sunrise reminded her of simpler times, partly because the garden had once been hers. Her mother had planted the roses. Her father had built the stone bench where she now sat, hidden behind overgrown hedges, watching light bleed gold across the sky. She didn't hear Andrew approach until he spoke. You're trespassing on my private thinking spot. Sophie jumped, her coffee sloshing over the rim of her mug. Andrew stood 3 feet away in running clothes. The first time she'd seen him in anything but suits. Sweat darkened his shirt, and his hair fell across his forehead in a way that made him look almost boyish. Almost human. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know. I'll leave. Don't. The word came sharp, then softer. Stay. I was joking. Badly, apparently. He gestured at the bench. May I? Sophie nodded, too shocked to speak. Andrew sat, leaving careful distance between them, and stared at the sunrise with an expression she couldn't read. They sat in silence for 3 full minutes. Sophie counted them, her pulse thundering in her ears. My mother planted these roses, Andrew finally said. She used to say they were the only living things that understood beauty required thorns. His finger traced the scar on his palm. Sophie remembered that scar, remembered the day he'd gotten it trying to pick her flower. I haven't sat here since she died. Sophie's chest tightened. Why now? I saw you. From my window. Andrew's jaw tightened. You looked peaceful, like you belonged here. It made me wonder if I'd forgotten how to belong anywhere. The vulnerability in his voice nearly undid her. This was him, the real Andrew, the one she'd been searching for. Bruised and lonely, and so deeply lost he didn't even know he was drowning. You belong where you choose to belong, Sophie said quietly. It's not about the place. It's about the moment. Andrew turned to look at her then, really look at her, and Sophie felt the weight of his attention like sunlight after years of darkness. You're different from the others. The staff, I mean. You don't avoid my eyes. You don't stammer when I speak. Maybe I'm too stupid to be properly afraid. His laugh startled them both. A real laugh, rusty from disuse but genuine. Or too brave. He paused. What happened to you, Miss Dawson? How does someone end up here, working for someone like me? The truth sat on her tongue like a stone. You happened to me. Your company. Your signatures. Your indifference. Bad luck, she said instead. And worse choices. I understand that. Andrew's eyes returned to the horizon. I've made my share of both. Sophie seized the opening. Like what? Like forgetting. His voice dropped, so low she almost missed it. I had a life before my parents died. Friends. Promises. A girl who... He stopped abruptly, his expression hardening. Never mind. It doesn't matter. That life ended when they did. A girl. Sophie's heart stuttered. What girl? Someone I was supposed to marry. An arrangement our parents made. Andrew's laugh was bitter now. Ridiculous, right? We were 8 years old. But I believed it. Believed we'd grow up together, and it would all make sense somehow. He shook his head. After the accident, her family couldn't distance themselves fast enough. I wasn't profitable anymore. Wasn't worth the investment. That's not. Sophie bit her tongue hard enough to taste copper. That's not what happened. My parents tried to keep the engagement. You were the one who disappeared. But was that true? She'd been 8 years old, sheltered from adult conversations and business decisions. What did she really know about why everything had fallen apart? It was a long time ago, Andrew said, standing. The vulnerable moment had passed, his walls rebuilding themselves brick by brick. Dwelling on the past is a luxury I can't afford. He started to walk away, then paused. Miss Dawson, thank you for not pitying me. Most people either fear me or feel sorry for me. You do neither. Maybe I just see you, Sophie said softly. Something flickered in his eyes. Confusion or recognition, or hope. She couldn't tell. Then he nodded once and jogged back toward the mansion, leaving her alone with the roses and the sunrise and the terrible, wonderful knowledge that Andrew hadn't forgotten her. He just convinced himself she'd forgotten him first. The second crack came during the thunderstorm. Sophie was in the library, her favorite assignment, because it felt like visiting an old friend when the power failed. Lightning split the sky, and suddenly she was standing in darkness, so complete she couldn't see her own hands. Then she heard it, breathing. Fast, shallow, panicked. Hello. Sophie called out. Is someone... Don't. Andrew's voice cut through the dark, raw with something that sounded like terror. Don't come closer. Don't. Another lightning flash illuminated him crouched in the corner by his desk, hands over his ears, eyes squeezed shut. He was shaking. Sophie's professional distance evaporated. She crossed the room in seconds, dropping to her knees beside him. Andrew, Mr. Callahan, what's wrong? Are you hurt? The storm. His words came between gasps. The accident, my parents. It was raining, thunder, the car can't breathe. PTSD. Sophie recognized it immediately. One of her boarding school roommates had suffered the same after a fire. She did what the counselors had taught her. She made her voice steady and calm. You're safe. You're in your library. The storm is outside, but you're inside. You're safe. She wanted desperately to touch him, to ground him, but didn't dare. Can you hear my voice? Yes. Barely a whisper. Good. Listen to my voice, not the storm. Focus on something you can control. Sophie searched the darkness, found his hand, and very gently placed it over her heart. Feel that. My heartbeat. Count them with me. 1, 2, 3. Andrew's palm pressed against her chest, right over the locket she wore beneath her uniform. His breathing gradually slowed, matching the rhythm she set. 4, 5, 6. The shaking eased. His eyes opened, focusing on her in the intermittent lightning flashes. 7, 8, 9. Sophie. He said her first name for the first time, and it sounded like prayer, like apology, like coming home. I'm sorry. I haven't had an episode in years. I thought I was past this. Trauma doesn't have an expiration date. Sophie should have moved her hand, should have restored the proper distance between employer and employee, but she couldn't make herself pull away. It's okay to still be hurt by what hurt you. I'm not hurt. I'm broken. Andrew's hand remained over her heart, his thumb unconsciously tracing the outline of the locket beneath fabric. My therapist says I've built walls so high I can't remember what I was protecting anymore. Then maybe you need to start small. One brick at a time. Sophie's voice wavered. Remember one good thing. Just one. Andrew was silent for so long she thought he'd refuse. Then wildflowers. There was a girl who loved wildflowers. Yellow ones especially. I used to pick them for her, even though my mother said they were weeds. His eyes met Sophie's in the darkness. I haven't thought about her in years. But just now, With you here, I remembered. She smelled like lavender and sunshine, and when she laughed, it sounded like. He stopped. His hand, still pressed over her heart, suddenly stilled. Like what? Sophie whispered, terrified and hopeful and desperate to hear him say it. Like coming home. Andrew's fingers found the chain of her necklace through the fabric, following it up to where it disappeared beneath her collar. Why does your heartbeat feel familiar? The lights flickered back on, harsh and fluorescent, and the moment shattered. Andrew pulled back like he'd been burned, his professional mask slamming into place. Thank you for your assistance, Miss Dawson. You can go. But now, please. Sophie fled, her hand clutching the locket so hard the engraving cut into her palm. He'd been so close, so impossibly close to remembering. Another minute in the dark, and he would have asked to see the locket, would have seen his own handwriting from 18 years ago, would have known. But she'd run. Again. That night, Sophie found an envelope under her door. Inside, a check for $5,000 and a note in Andrew's precise handwriting. Hazard pay for dealing with my episode. And a thank you for not treating me like I was fragile. Most people do. You didn't. AC. Sophie stared at the check until the numbers blurred. $5,000 would change her life, could get her a real apartment, a cushion against disaster, a chance to stop living moment to moment. But taking it felt like accepting payment for something that shouldn't have a price. For caring, for seeing him, for still loving the boy beneath the man, even after everything. She tore the check into pieces and slipped them back under his door with her own note. You don't owe me anything. Some things aren't about money. SD. The third crack came at the charity gala. Mrs. Castellano had been frantic. 3 servers had called in sick, and the mansion was hosting 200 of the city's elite. Sophie found herself in a borrowed black dress and white apron, carrying champagne through crowds of people who'd once been her parents' friends. She kept her head down, praying no one would recognize her. 3 months of poverty had hollowed her cheeks and darkened her eyes. She looked like a shadow of the girl she'd been. Sophie. Andrew materialized beside her, devastating in a tuxedo, his eyes scanning the crowd with practiced disinterest. I need you to do something for me. Sir, there's a woman. Tall, blonde, predatory smile. She's been hunting me all evening. His jaw tightened. I need you to pretend to be my date. Just for 10 minutes. Enough to make her lose interest. Sophie's heart stopped. Sir, I don't think. Please. The word came quiet, almost desperate. I'll double your wages for the month. Just please. Before Sophie could answer, the woman appeared, beautiful and sharp, her eyes fixed on Andrew like a hawk spotting prey. Andrew, darling, I've been looking everywhere for you. Andrew's hand found Sophie's waist, pulling her close with a possessiveness that felt shockingly real. Victoria, I'd like you to meet someone special. Sophie felt the room tilt. Andrew's hand was warm through the thin fabric of her dress, his body aligned with hers in a way that made breathing difficult. This close, she could see the silver threading through his dark hair, the tiny scar on his chin from a childhood bicycle accident, the way his pulse jumped in his throat when he looked down at her. This is Sophie, Andrew said, and the way he said her name, soft, protective, almost reverent, made her knees weak. She's been important to me for a long time. It was a lie, a performance. But God help her, Sophie wanted it to be true. If you're enjoying this story, drop a comment below and let me know, should Sophie reveal herself now or wait? I love hearing your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. Victoria's smile turned venomous. How quaint. I didn't realize you were slumming, Andrew. I'm not slumming. Andrew's voice could have frozen flame. I'm remembering what matters. Something you never understood. He steered Sophie away, his hand never leaving her waist, and they ended up on the terrace where the party noise faded to a murmur. City lights sparkled below them like fallen stars. I'm sorry, Andrew said, finally releasing her. That was presumptuous. I shouldn't have put you in that position. It's fine. Sophie's waist still burned where his hand had been. Who was she? Someone my board wants me to marry. Merger benefits, they call it. Andrew's laugh was hollow. I've spent 10 years building an empire, and now everyone expects me to sell my life to maintain it. To marry someone I don't love. To have children who will grow up with a father who doesn't know how to be human. He turned to look at her, and his eyes held so much pain it stole her breath. Do you think that's fair? That success means sacrificing everything that makes you alive. No. Sophie stepped closer, drawn by something stronger than caution. I think you've already sacrificed enough. I think you've spent years punishing yourself for surviving when your parents didn't. And I think the boy you used to be, the one who picked wildflowers and made promises and believed in forever, I think he's still in there. Buried but not dead. Andrew stared at her like she'd spoken a language he'd forgotten he knew. How do you? He stopped, shook his head. Sometimes when I look at you, I feel like I should remember something. Like there's a word on the tip of my tongue, or a melody I can't quite recall. Do you ever feel like you've met someone before, even though you know you haven't? Yes, Sophie wanted to scream. Yes, because we have. Because you gave me your jacket when I was cold and kissed my scraped knee better and promised you'd marry me under the oak tree in my parents' garden. Sometimes, she said instead, maybe some people just fit, even as strangers. Maybe. Andrew reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek so gently it felt like a ghost's touch. Or maybe some connections survive even when memories don't. He was going to kiss her. Sophie could see it in his eyes, feel it in the way the air between them charged with electricity. This was the moment everything would change. Then his phone rang. Andrew cursed, stepping back, the spell breaking. I have to take this. Emergency in Tokyo. He looked at her with something that might have been regret. Thank you, Sophie. For tonight. For everything. He disappeared back into the gala, leaving Sophie alone on the terrace with her racing heart and the ghost of his almost kiss. She pressed her hand to her lips, feeling the shape of what hadn't happened, and made a decision. She would tell him. Soon. Before this thing between them grew into something that would shatter when the truth came out. Before she fell any deeper in love with the man he'd become while still mourning the boy he'd been. But not tonight. Tonight she would let herself have this. The memory of his hand on her waist, his eyes seeing her truly, his words admitting she mattered. Tomorrow she would be brave. Tomorrow she would show him the locket. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow never came. Sophie woke to chaos, sirens wailing outside, Mrs. Castellano's voice sharp with panic, doors slamming throughout the mansion. She threw on her uniform and ran upstairs to find the entire staff gathered in the foyer, faces pale with shock. What's happening? Sophie grabbed Maria's arm. Is there a fire? Worse. Maria's eyes were red. Mr. Callahan collapsed in his study an hour ago. They think it's his heart. The ambulance just left. The world dropped away beneath Sophie's feet. What hospital? St. Catherine's. But Sophie, we can't. Staff aren't allowed. Sophie was already running. She didn't think about protocol or permission or the fact that she was just a maid with no right to be at her employer's bedside. She thought only of Andrew in a hospital bed, alone, possibly dying without knowing the truth, without knowing he'd been loved all along. The locket bounced against her chest as she ran, a metronome counting down the seconds she might have left. St. Catherine's emergency room was a fluorescent nightmare of beeping machines and antiseptic smell. Sophie pushed past the nurse's station, searching frantically until she spotted him through a window in one of the rooms. Andrew lay unconscious, for lines snaking from his arms, heart monitor beeping steady but weak. A doctor stood beside him, reviewing charts with a grim expression. I'm sorry, but family only. A nurse tried to intercept Sophie, but she pushed past. I'm his fiancée. The lie came automatic, desperate. Please, I need to see him. The nurse's expression softened. 5 minutes. He's stable, but we're running tests. The stress alone could have. She stopped herself. Just talk to him. Patients can often hear us, even unconscious. Sophie sank into the chair beside Andrew's bed, her hand finding his. His skin was cold, and fear clawed at her throat with razor teeth. Andrew. Her voice cracked. I know you can't hear me, but I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you the moment I walked into your mansion. She pulled the locket free, opened it with trembling fingers, and placed it in his palm. It's me. It's Sophie. Sophia Delacroix Dawson, the girl you promised forever to. The girl who loved wildflowers and wore lavender and laughed like coming home. Tears streamed down her face unchecked. I've been there all along, cleaning your floors and hiding in plain sight because I was too afraid, too angry to let you see me. Andrew's hand remained still, the locket resting in his palm like an accusation. I found a folder. I know your company destroyed my family, and I've spent weeks trying to understand how the boy who picked me flowers could grow into the man who signed those papers. Sophie's grip tightened on his hand. But then I saw you in the garden, saw you in the storm, saw the way you looked at me at the gala, and I realized you're not cruel. You're just broken, and so am I. And maybe broken people are the only ones who know how to carefully hold each other's pieces. The heart monitor beeped steady, indifferent to her confession. So here's what I need you to do. Wake up, fight, come back. And when you do, I'll tell you everything. The truth about what happened to our families, about why I disappeared, about why I stayed hidden even when I wanted nothing more than to run to you. She pressed her lips to his knuckles. But you have to wake up first. You have to give me the chance to explain. Please, Andrew. Please don't leave me again. That's quite a confession. Sophie's head snapped up. A woman stood in the doorway, mid-60s, elegant in a way that spoke of old money and older grief. Her eyes were Andrew's eyes, dark and deep and impossibly sad. I'm Margaret Callahan, the woman said quietly. Andrew's aunt. And you must be the Sophie he's been dreaming about for 18 years. Sophie's breath stopped. He dreams about me? Every night after his parents died, he'd wake up crying for a girl named Sophie. His therapist said it was trauma response, his mind clinging to the last happy memory before his world shattered. Margaret moved to the other side of Andrew's bed, her hand resting on his shoulder with maternal tenderness. Eventually the dreams stopped, or he stopped mentioning them. I always wondered if he'd truly forgotten, or if he just buried you so deep that waking hurt less than remembering. I don't understand. Sophie's voice was barely a whisper. Why didn't anyone tell me? After the accident, my parents said his family wanted nothing to do with us, that we weren't good enough anymore. Margaret's expression hardened. Your parents were informed that Andrew had been sent to Switzerland for treatment. That contact with his old life would impede his recovery. She paused, choosing words carefully. What they weren't told was that Andrew begged to see you, screamed your name for weeks, wrote you letters his guardians never sent. The room tilted. What? Andrew's uncle, my late husband, controlled the Callahan fortune after the accident. He believed attachments made people weak, especially attachments to little girls from families he considered financially unstable. Margaret's voice dripped with old bitterness. He severed every connection to Andrew's past, changed phone numbers, intercepted mail, even went so far as to spread rumors that your family was eager to escape the burden of an engagement to an orphan. Sophie felt sick. My parents thought he abandoned us, thought his family considered us beneath them. And Andrew thought you forgot him the moment he stopped being valuable. Margaret's eyes glistened. My husband was a ruthless man. He raised Andrew to be the same, taught him that love was weakness, that trust was liability, that the only thing that mattered was power and profit. She looked at her nephew with infinite sadness. By the time I gained custody when Andrew turned 18, the damage was done. He'd become exactly what my husband wanted, a brilliant, wealthy, emotionally isolated man who trusted no one. The bankruptcy. Sophie's voice shook. Did Andrew know he was destroying my family? That's complicated. Margaret sat heavily in the other chair. 3 months ago, Andrew discovered documents in his late uncle's papers, evidence that your parents had been blackmailed, that their bad investments were actually calculated traps set by my husband to eliminate them as potential threats to the Callahan empire. Sophie's world inverted. What? Your parents made the mistake of trying to contact Andrew when he turned 21, sent letters explaining what had really happened, asking for reconciliation. Margaret's voice dropped. My husband intercepted those letters too. Then he systematically destroyed your family's finances to ensure they'd never have the resources or social standing to reconnect with Andrew. But he died 5 years ago. Sophie's mind raced. Why did the bankruptcy happen now? Because Andrew found the letters, found evidence of everything his uncle had done to him, to you, to your parents. Margaret reached across Andrew's unconscious form and gripped Sophie's hand. He tried to stop it, contacted your parents, offered to clear their debts, to restore what his uncle had stolen. But by then, your father's pride wouldn't allow it. He refused Andrew's help, called it guilt money from Callahan, and chose bankruptcy over accepting what he saw as charity. Sophie couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process the magnitude of what she was hearing. Andrew was devastated. Margaret continued. Spent months trying to find you. Hired investigators, searched every record. When he couldn't, he bought your family's estate at auction. She smiled sadly. Not to profit from it, but to preserve it. He has architectural plans to restore every inch to its original state. He walks those gardens every morning, looking at the roses, and I think some part of him is still searching for you. The locket felt impossibly heavy in Andrew's palm. All this time, all these weeks of anger and suspicion and believing he'd betrayed her, when the truth was, he's been looking for me while I was hiding from him. Sophie's laugh came out broken. We've been destroying each other for 18 years because of lies told by people who should have protected us. Yes. Margaret's thumb traced circles on Andrew's hand. And now you're here. You found each other despite everything. The question is, what happens now? Before Sophie could answer, Andrew's eyes fluttered open. He stared at the ceiling for 3 heartbeats, disoriented and weak. Then his gaze tracked to his aunt, to Sophie, and finally down to his palm, where the locket lay open. Sophie watched the recognition hit him like lightning. Watched 18 years of buried memories surface all at once. Every suppressed dream, every forced forgetting, every moment his subconscious had been screaming the truth his conscious mind refused to acknowledge. Sophie, her name on his lips sounded like resurrection. You were the whole time? She nodded, tears streaming. The whole time. Andrew's face crumpled. I made you clean my floors. I was cruel. I treated you like... His breath hitched. God, Sophie, I was so awful to you. You didn't know. I should have known. His hand closed around the locket with desperate strength. Something in me recognized you. Every time I looked at you, every conversation, every moment, some part of me was screaming that you mattered, that you were important. I felt it in the garden, in the storm, at the gala. His voice broke. How could I not have known? Because they made sure you wouldn't. Sophie leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. Your uncle, the lies, the years of being taught not to trust your own heart. None of this is your fault. I signed those papers. Andrew's eyes squeezed shut. I approved the bankruptcy proceedings before I found the evidence. Before I knew. I destroyed what was left of your life. No, Margaret interjected firmly. Your uncle destroyed their lives years ago. You try to fix it. That Sophie's father refused help isn't your failure. It's his pride. His choice. She's right. Sophie cupped Andrew's face, forcing him to look at her. I was angry when I found that folder. Thought you'd done it deliberately. But Andrew, these past weeks, watching you, knowing you, I realize you're not capable of that kind of cruelty. You're just wounded. Like me. I dreamed about you. Andrew's thumb traced her cheekbone with reverent gentleness. Every night for years. You were wearing a yellow dress and laughing, and I'd wake up crying because I couldn't remember your face. Couldn't remember your name. Just the feeling of being happy. He pressed the locket to his chest. I kept this feeling buried so deep because remembering hurt too much. And now you're here, and you're real, and I'm terrified I'll wake up and you'll be gone again. I'm not going anywhere. Sophie kissed his forehead, his cheeks, the bridge of his nose, every gesture trying to convince him this was real. I'm here. I'm staying. And we're going to figure this out together. Together. Andrew tested the word like he'd forgotten its meaning. Then, I'm so sorry. For everything. For not finding you sooner. For making you work for me. For being too broken to recognize the one person who could have made me whole. Then unbreak with me. Sophie smiled through her tears. One brick at a time, remember? We'll tear down your walls and mine. We'll remember how to be the people we were supposed to become. Andrew pulled her close, and Sophie felt his heart beating against hers through the thin hospital gown, steady and strong and alive. The locket pressed between them, a talisman, a promise, a bridge across 18 years of forced separation. "I never stopped loving you," Andrew whispered into her hair. "I buried it, denied it, convinced myself it was just a child's fantasy. But Sophie, I never stopped. Some part of me was always waiting for you to come home. I'm home now." Sophie breathed in his scent, cedar, and something uniquely him beneath the antiseptic hospital smell. "We both are." Margaret stood quietly, tears streaming down her face. "I'll give you two some privacy." "But Sophie," she paused at the door. "Thank you for not giving up on him, for seeing past the walls to the boy underneath. You've given him back something I thought was lost forever." "What's that?" Sophie asked. "Hope." The door clicked shut, and Sophie and Andrew were alone with the truth and the locket and 18 years of love that had survived everything designed to kill it. "What happens now?" Andrew asked, his fingers threading through hers. Sophie thought about the mansion, the staff quarters, the invisible existence she'd been living. Thought about the boy in the photograph and the man in the hospital bed, and how they were finally, miraculously, the same person. "Now," she smiled. "Now we start over. No lies, no hiding, no walls. Just you and me and the truth." "The truth." Andrew brought her hand to his lips. "The truth is I've loved you since I was 8 years old. And the truth is I want to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of the second chance you're giving me. You don't have to prove anything." Sophie's voice was fierce. "You just have to be you. The real you. The one who picks wildflowers and remembers promises and still believes in forever." Forever. Andrew's smile was tentative but real. The first genuine smile she'd seen from him since returning to his life. "That's a long time." "Good." Sophie kissed him softly, gently, like sealing a promise. "Because we have 18 years to make up for, and I don't plan on wasting another minute. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss what happens next in this story. Trust me on this one." Andrew was released from the hospital 2 days later with strict orders to rest. The diagnosis: severe exhaustion and a panic attack that had mimicked cardiac arrest. Years of suppressed trauma finally demanding acknowledgement. Sophie moved from the basement to the guest room nearest Andrew's suite. Margaret's insistence over Mrs. Castellano's scandalized protests. But the physical proximity couldn't bridge the chasm that opened between them in the quiet moments. Andrew wouldn't look at her. "I need time," he said on the third morning, his eyes fixed on the garden below his window. "To process, to understand what's real and what's just guilt and childhood memories." Sophie's chest tightened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't know if what I feel is love or just nostalgia for who I used to be." His voice was hollow. "You deserve someone who's certain. Someone who isn't broken beyond repair." "Andrew, please." He finally turned, and the distance in his eyes shattered her. "I've hurt you enough. Let me do this one thing right. Let you go before I damage you further." Sophie left his room with tears blurring her vision, the locket heavy around her neck. She found Maria in the kitchen, automatically seeking comfort. "He's pushing you away," Maria said, pouring tea with steady hands. "Men like Mr. Callahan, they don't know how to accept good things. They're so used to loss, they create it before it can surprise them. What do I do? You fight, or you surrender." Maria's eyes held infinite sympathy. "Only you know which is worth it." That night, Sophie heard voices from Andrew's study. She shouldn't have eavesdropped, but some instinct made her pause outside the door. "The board is concerned." An unfamiliar male voice, sharp with business. "Your health scare, this girl's sudden appearance. They're questioning your judgment. Victoria Chambers has made a very generous merger proposal. Marriage would stabilize everything." "I don't love Victoria." Andrew's voice was tired. "Love is irrelevant. You're the CEO of $1 billion company, not a teenager. Marry the maid if you want, but be prepared to lose everything your parents built. Everything you've sacrificed for." Silence stretched like broken glass. Then, "I need to think." Sophie ran before she could hear more, but the damage was done. Andrew had to choose, her or his empire. his heart or his parents' legacy. And she already knew which one a man taught never to trust love would choose. Sophie spent the next day packing. If Andrew needed space, she'd give him infinity. She'd survive bankruptcy and abandonment. She'd survive this too. She was folding a uniform she'd first worn when Andrew appeared in her doorway. "What are you doing?" His face was pale. "Leaving. Like you wanted." "I never said." Andrew stepped inside, closing the door. "Sophie, I've been an idiot." "I know. I was scared. Terrified, actually." He moved closer, his hands shaking. "Last night, I sat in my study, trying to choose between you and everything I built. Try to be logical and smart, and all the things my uncle taught me." His laugh was broken. "And then I realized, he already stole 18 years from us. I'll be damned if I give him one more second." Sophie's hands stilled on the uniform. "What about the board? The merger?" "The board can find a new CEO if they don't like my choices." Andrew took her hands, urgency making him reckless. "I've spent my entire adult life building an empire to prove I wasn't the broken orphan everyone pitted. But you know what? I'd burn it all down for one real moment with you. For one genuine smile. For the chance to be the boy who picked wildflowers again." "Andrew, I love you." The words tumbled out desperate and true. "Not the memory of you. Not nostalgia. You, Sophie Dawson, who's brave enough to scrub floors and fierce enough to challenge me, and stubborn enough not to give up on the worst version of me." He pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you, and I'm terrified I've already lost you." Sophie's tears came hot and fast. "You haven't lost me. You could never lose me." She kissed him hard, pouring 18 years of longing into it. "I love you too. I've loved you since we were 8, and I'll love you when we're 80. Nothing, not poverty, not pride, not your uncle's cruelty, nothing will ever change that." "Then stay." Andrew pulled back just enough to look at her. "Not as staff, not as an obligation. Stay as my partner, my equal, the girl who was always supposed to be mine." "Yes." Sophie laughed through tears. "Yes to all of it. If you're still with me, comment below. I want to hear your thoughts on this moment. And make sure you're subscribed because the ending is going to leave you satisfied in the best way." The board meeting happened 3 days later. Andrew walked in with Sophie at his side, their joined hands a declaration. "Gentlemen," Andrew addressed the 12 stone-faced men around the table, "I'm here to announce changes. First, I'm declining Victoria Chambers' merger proposal. Second, I'm restructuring my role to allow for actual work-life balance. And third," he squeezed Sophie's hand, "I'm getting married. To the woman who's loved me since before I was a CEO, a millionaire, or anything but a boy who made promises he's finally ready to keep." "This is highly irregular," one board member sputtered. "She's staff. The optics alone." "She's Sophia Delacroix Dawson," Andrew interrupted, his voice steel. "Daughter of the Dawson family, victim of my uncle's cruelty, and the strongest person I've ever met. If that's not good enough for this board, then find yourselves a new CEO. I'm done sacrificing my humanity for profit margins." The silence was deafening. Then Margaret, who held significant shares as family trustee, stood. "I vote in favor of Andrew's decisions. All of them." She smiled at Sophie. "It's about time a Callahan chose love over legacy." One by one, the board members nodded, some grudging, some relieved, all recognizing that Andrew Callahan had finally become the man his parents had hoped for, before tragedy and manipulation had stolen him away. That evening, Andrew took Sophie back to the garden where they'd once played as children. The roses his mother had planted bloomed wild and fragrant, and the stone bench waited like it had been expecting them. "I had something made." Andrew pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside, a ring with a yellow diamond, the color of wildflowers and sunshine and Sophie's childhood laughter. "It's not the elaborate proposal you deserve, but it's real, and it's us." Sophie's vision blurred. "It's perfect. Sophie Dawson, will you marry me? For real this time. Not because our parents arranged it, not because of obligation or nostalgia, but because I choose you. Every day. Forever. Yes." Sophie threw her arms around his neck. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Andrew slipped the ring on her finger, and it fit like it had been waiting 18 years to find its home. 6 months later, Sophie stood in her childhood bedroom, restored to exactly how she remembered it, down to the wallpaper and the window seat where she'd once read for hours. Andrew had spent a fortune renovating the entire estate, returning it piece by piece to its former glory. Not for himself, but for Sophie. For the girl who'd lost everything and found herself anyway. "You ready?" Maria appeared in the doorway, resplendent in her maid of honor dress. "Everyone's waiting." Sophie looked at herself in the mirror, no longer the gaunt, desperate woman who'd signed an employment contract 6 months ago. She'd gained back the weight, yes, but more importantly, she'd gained back herself. Her light, her hope, her belief in happy endings. The wedding was small, just Margaret, Maria, a few close friends, and Sophie's parents, who'd returned from Europe with tears and apologies Andrew had graciously accepted. The garden overflowed with wildflowers, yellow and bright against the green. Andrew waited under the oak tree where they'd once made childhood promises, devastating in his tuxedo, but smiling, genuinely smiling, for the first time in 18 years. "Ah," Sophie said when she reached him, suddenly shy. "Hi." Andrew took her hands, his eyes shining. "You look like sunshine. You look like coming home." The ceremony was simple. Traditional vows, with one addition. They each read the promise they'd made at 8 years old, written in crayon on paper Andrew had kept hidden in his wallet all these years. A talisman he'd carried without knowing why. "I promise to love you forever and pick you flowers and share my cookies and never make you sad." Everyone laughed through tears as Andrew produced actual wildflowers from his pocket and a cookie from Maria's kitchen, presenting them with such solemnity that Sophie's heart cracked open with joy. "I kept my promise," he whispered as he slid the ring on her finger. "It just took me a while." "Better late than never," Sophie whispered back. They kissed as husband and wife under the oak tree, surrounded by roses and wildflowers and the ghosts of who they'd been, who they'd become, and who they'd always been meant to be. That night, in the bedroom they now shared, Andrew traced the outline of the locket Sophie still wore. "Thank you," he said softly, "for never giving up, for staying hidden until I was ready to see, for loving the worst version of me until I could remember how to be the best." "Thank you for coming back," Sophie replied, "for choosing us over fear, for remembering that boy who made promises. He never left." Andrew kissed her forehead. "He was just waiting for you to bring him home." And there, in the mansion that had been both prison and paradise, heartbreak and healing, end and beginning, Sophie and Andrew finally claimed the forever that had always been theirs. The locket rested on the nightstand, its engraving catching the moonlight. AC plus SD forever. Some promises, it turned out, were stronger than time, trauma, and all the forces designed to break them. Some promises were simply meant to be kept. The end. Thank you so much for reading Sophie and Andrew's journey. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment sharing your favorite moment. I read every single one, and your words mean the world to me. Don't forget to subscribe for more emotional stories of love, loss, and second chances. Until next time, remember, some connections survive even when memories don't. Keep believing in your own forever.